When you look up at the night sky, have you ever wondered, where did the world truly begin? Not with the Big Bang, not with evolution, but with chaos. A void so silent, so empty, it felt like the universe was holding its breath. In that darkness, there was no light, no time, no life. But then something stirred. The earth opened her eyes, Gaia. The sky stretched above her, Uranus. Love was born, Eros. And from the shadows crept Nyx, the night. This isn't science. This is myth. A world where gods love, rage, betray and kill. A world where mortals are just pawns in a divine game. And it all begins with a prophecy. A child will rise and overthrow the father of the gods. This is the origin of Olympus, of heroes, of curses that echo through eternity. So close your eyes, let your thoughts drift into the stars, and I'll tell you a story of how the gods came to be. The birth of everything, from chaos to cosmos. In the beginning, there was nothing, no light, no sound, no gods, no mortals. There was only chaos, a silent, infinite void. It was not evil, nor was it kind. It simply was, a shapeless presence that existed before time, before matter, before thought. From this endless emptiness, things began to emerge, might by force, not by intention, but like the soft breath of something just starting to dream. The first to take form was Gaia. The earth, she was the ground beneath everything, the mother of all that would ever live, solid, ancient, and full of potential. Beside her rose Uranus, the sky. He stretched above Gaia like a great dome of stars, covering her in endless blue and night. Together they formed the beginning of the world's body, earth and sky, joined in silence. Then came Tartarus, the deep abyss, a pit far below Gaia's surface. Darker than darkness, a place even chaos feared. From Tartarus would come imprisonment, punishment, and the boundaries of fear. But in those early days, it simply waited. Next was Nyx, the night. She slipped out of chaos like smoke, silent and cold, wrapping the edges of existence in her veil. Her presence brought the first sense of mystery, of stillness before the coming storm. And finally came Eros love, or, more precisely, the force of attraction. Not love as we understand it now, but the raw spark that made matter reach for matter. Sky reach for earth, life reach for life. Eros was not a god with a bow, but a presence, a whisper that pulled the universe together. With Eros came motion. With motion came union. And with union, creation. Gaia, moved by this force, gave birth to mountains, oceans, and the endless sky. From her own being, she brought forth Uranus, and with him, she created life. Titans, beings of immense size and power, the first children of earth and sky, 12 of them, each embodying a different aspect of existence. Among them was Cronus, the youngest and the most cunning. But there was a shadow over these new lives. Uranus, though a father, feared his children. He looked upon their strength and saw not wonder, but threat. So one by one, as Gaia gave birth, Uranus pushed the children back into her woman's, to the depths of the earth. The pain was unbearable. Gaia, who had given life, was now a prison for it. Her body stretched, cracked, and bled with the weight of her sons and daughters trapped within her. She cried out, not with sound, but with presence. through the roots of mountains and the folds of oceans. She begged her children to rise, to stop their father, to free themselves. But none dared. None except Cronus. He was patient, quiet, but inside him burned a storm. Gaia, desperate, fashioned a weapon, a sickle of hardest stone. She offered it to Cronus and whispered her plan. One evening, when Uranus descended from the heavens to lie with Gaia, Cronus hid in the shadows. As his father stretched across the sky, Cronus struck. With one swift motion, he castrated Uranus, separating sky from earth forever. The sky screamed. His blood rained down upon Gaia, and from it were born the furious creatures of vengeance, and the giants beings of chaos. The sea, stained red, swirled, and from its foam rose Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. The act was done. Uranus, defeated, withdrew from the world, never to return. Cronus had overthrown his father. The first cycle was complete sun rising against father, the old replaced by the new. Cronus freed his siblings from Gaia's womb. He took power, claiming the throne of the cosmos. The world, for a moment, seemed to breathe, but the air held unease. As Uranus retreated, he left behind a prophecy. He spoke not with a voice, but with a curse etched into the very bones of the earth. He warned Cronus, "As you have betrayed me, so too will you be betrayed. One of your own children will rise and destroy you." Cronus, once the hero, now became the tyrant. Fear took root in his heart, and fear changes gods just as it does men. When his wife, Rhea, bore him children, Cronus remembered the prophecy. So he swallowed them, one by one: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Each child, as they entered the world, was devoured whole. No screams, no tears, just the silence of a father's fear. Rhea, heartbroken, turned to Gaia. The earth had seen this before, and she knew the pattern was not finished. When Rhea bore her sixth child, she did not hand it to Cronus. Instead, she wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and gave him that. Cronus swallowed it, believing he had defeated fate once more. But the real child Zeus was hidden far away, in a cave on the island of Crete. There, surrounded by nymphs and shielded by divine magic, the boy grew. And with every passing day, the prophecy ripened. But that is a story for another time. For now, we return to what was. From chaos came Gaia. From Gaia and Uranus came life. From fear came violence. From violence, prophecy. And so began the endless cycle of creation, betrayal, and rebirth that would define the mythic age. This is how the cosmos began, not with harmony, not with order, but with conflict, with sacrifice, with blood, and yet, somehow, with love. A love strong enough to create mountains. A love desperate enough to defy the sky. And a love terrifying enough to swallow its own children. This is the world before the world. The first heartbeat of myth. The whisper before the storm. The rise of the Titans, the age before gods. After Uranus fell and the heavens withdrew, the world entered a new era, the age of the Titans. At its center stood Cronus, now the ruler of the cosmos, seated high above on a throne of stone and sky. The world was not yet shaped by mortals, nor gods as we know them, but by these massive, ancient beings whose very footsteps shaped mountains and stirred oceans. Cronus, though born of violence, ushered in what many would call a golden age, time of balance, of harvests of silence between storms. At his side stood Rhea, his sister and queen, who matched his power with grace, his coldness with warmth. They ruled together over a world not yet broken, but no silence lasts forever. Cronus had spilled blood to earn his crown, and blood never forgets. As his father's body vanished into sky and shadow, a curse lingered like fog behind every word spoken. The prophecy: a son will rise. A son will overthrow his father. Cronus remembered it. Every day, and with each child Rhea bore, the fear in his chest grew heavier. He watched her belly swell, heard the newborns first cries and swallowed them. One by one, he told himself it was mercy, that he was sparing them from the curse. But truthfully, he feared what he could not control. Hestia was the first, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. Rhea held them only for a moment, just enough to feel their warmth. Then they were gone, swallowed whole, still breathing, by the man who called himself king. Rhea said nothing at first. The pain was too deep, and silence was the only shield she had. But with every child taken, something inside her shifted. It was not rage, not yet. It was sorrow. Sorrow that pressed down on her like winter, turning her hands cold and her voice distant. When she was pregnant, again for the 6th time, Rhea could no longer bear it. She wandered the earth alone, looking for something older than fear. She found it in Gaia, the earth who had once given birth to Cronus, who had once watched Uranus bleed into the sea. Gaia listened. She did not speak in words, but in tremors, in wind, in the curling roots of old trees. And Rhea understood. When her 6th child was born, Rhea did not call for Cronus. She wrapped the baby in silence, held him for longer than the others, and wept quietly, knowing this moment would pass like all others. Then she placed a stone in swaddling cloth, mimicking the shape of her child, and handed it to Cronus. He swallowed it without question, satisfied that he had outmaneuvered fate once more. But the child, the real child, was hidden far away, across the sea to the island of Crete, there, in a deep and shadowed cave. Surrounded by the rhythms of the earth and the lull of hidden springs, the boy grew. His name was Zeus, and unlike his siblings, he would know freedom. The nymphs who raised him fed him honey, and the goat Amalthea gave him her milk. The cave echoed with laughter, song, and the quiet beating of destiny. Outside, the world turned. Cronus ruled without knowing he was already falling. Years passed. Zeus grew. He learned to speak with thunder in his throat and to think with storm behind his eyes. But he did not rush. He waited, for he knew that victory in myth does not belong to the strongest, but to the one who understands when to strike. When the time came, Zeus returned not as a boy, but as a storm cloaked in flesh, guided by Gaia's wisdom and armed with a plan older than his own breath. Zeus approached his father's court in disguise. There he met Metis, a titaness of wisdom, whose thoughts flowed deeper than rivers. Together they brewed a potion, not of poison, but of memory. A potion that would force Cronus to remember, truly remember what he had done. Zeus poured it into his father's drink, and Cronus, unsuspecting, drank. The earth trembled, the sky darkened, and Cronus bent forward, not in pain, but in release. One by one, the swallowed gods were freed: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, fully grown. Untouched by time, they emerged not as infants, but as deities silent, solemn, and reborn. For the first time, the children of Cronus stood together, not as prisoners, but as challengers. War did not begin immediately. The Titans did not surrender their throne without resistance. For 10 years, the skies were split by lightning and ash. Titans against Olympians. Brother against brother. The war shook the roots of the world. Mountains cracked. Rivers ran backward. Stars fell like rain. But that is the next chapter. For now, what matters is this, that the cycle had begun again. A sun had risen, a father had fallen, and the age of Titans grand, solemn, and ancient was drawing to a close. In its place, something new was stirring. Not peace, not yet, but promise. The promise of gods who would feel, love, deceive, protect, and destroy. Gods who would walk among mortals and forget, even for a moment, that they were ever divine. This is the tale of the age before the gods, an era carved in stone, echoing through the bones of the earth, and though it has faded into myth, its echoes remain in every mountain that trembles, in every thunderclap across the sea, and in every voice that dares to rise against its fate. The War of the Gods. Titamaki. The sky was quiet before the war, as if the world itself was holding its breath, knowing that something ancient was about to end. Zeus stood atop Mount Olympus, not yet a king, but already a storm. Around him stood his brothers and sisters, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, gods born from fear, now bound by something stronger, purpose. Below them, the Titans still ruled. Cronus, once a sun who defied the heavens, now clung to a fading throne. Around him, the other elder beings prepared to defend the old order. Oceanus, wise and watchful. Hyperion, bright as fire. Iapetus, silent as stone. And others who had never known defeat. For 10 years, the world trembled. The war between Titans and Olympians became known as Titanomachia, battle not just of strength, but of will, of inheritance, of destiny refusing to be silenced. At first, it was not clear who would win. The Titans had power and age. They knew the ways of the earth, the weight of mountains, the language of stars. The Olympians had fury, but no weapons that could match the old giants. Their victory seemed impossible, but deep beneath the crust of the world, 3 beings stood forgotten, chained, waiting. Not monsters, but craftsmen, creatures with a single eye, able to see through the heart of matter. They had once been imprisoned by Cronus himself, locked in the depths of Tartarus for the threat their gifts posed. Now Zeus descended to them. He broke their chains, not with fire, but with promise. In return for freedom, he asked for weapons, not ordinary tools of war, but symbols of divine power. The Cyclopes agreed. For Zeus, they forged lightning, a thunderbolt so sharp it could split sky and time. For Poseidon, they shaped a trident that could stir oceans and crack the earth. And for Hades, they gave a helmet, woven from shadows, that made its wearer invisible to gods and men alike. Armed with these relics, the Olympians rose again. The war grew darker. Titans hurled mountains, reshaped rivers, tried to crush Olympus beneath the weight of the world. But Zeus hurled thunder back at them. Poseidon struck the land, causing the sea to rise and drown armies. Hades slipped unseen into enemy lines, sowing terror with a silence that could not be touched. Gaia, the earth herself, groaned under the weight of their struggle. Forests burned, sky turned black. The seas boiled. The old world was ending. And in the center of it all, Zeus and Cronus met not, just as son and father, but as forces of change and tradition crashing against each other. They fought for days, neither yielding. Cronus struck with time itself, a power that could age anything it touched. But Zeus was storm-fluid, wild, unstoppable. In the final moment, as lightning cracked the bones of the sky, Zeus summoned all his strength and brought down a thunderbolt that split the air and shattered Cronus' sickle. The Titan fell not with a cry, but with silence. As if the world had exhaled at last. The battle was over. The Titans, one by one, were defeated. Those who resisted were bound in chains forged by the Cyclopes and cast into Tartarus, the abyss deeper than death, guarded by monsters that never slept. Cronus was among them, locked in timeless darkness. The age of Titans was over. The Olympians stood alone atop the world, not just as victors, but as rulers of a new order. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon, the sea, Hades, the underworld. The others found their place, shaping seasons, hearths, harvests, and vows. The war had ended, but the scars remained. The land bore the marks of divine rage. Mountains that once walked now stood still. Rivers that once ran straight now curved with the memory of battle. Mortals, not yet born, would one day look at these features and wonder how they came to be. The truth would live only in myth, but myths remember what history forgets. The Titanomachy was more than a war, it was a breaking of a cycle. A son did not just rise to overthrow his father, he built something new in its place. Order, laws, even mercy. But power is never just given. It is taken, earned, and feared. As the Titans fell silent in Tartarus, the world began to breathe again. Slowly, cautiously, a new age had begun, one ruled by gods who were not perfect, but present, who walked among mortals, loved and lost, and whose stories would echo for thousands of years. The war had cost everything, but from it, Olympus was born. The Olympians, the new reign begins. The war was over, but the world was far from peaceful. The Titans had fallen, locked away in Tartarus, their voices silenced under layers of stone and fire. Olympus now stood above the clouds, a palace of marble and storm, where the new gods, the Olympians, gathered, not just to rule, but to remember. 12 thrones were carved, each one shaped by power, fear, desire, and prophecy. At the center sat Zeus, lord of the sky, bearer of thunder, who had risen from a hidden cave to shatter an empire. He ruled with confidence and a hunger for control. But even he knew the thrones built from war rarely rest easily. Beside him sat Hera, his sister and wife, goddess of marriage and queen of Olympus. Her beauty was matched only by her pride, and though her heart once burned for Zeus, his many betrayals turned that fire into something colder: jealousy, patience, and a quiet rage that moved like shadow behind silk. Poseidon, Zeus' brother, took the sea as his domain, riding waves with a trident in hand and salt in his blood. The oceans bent to his will, and sailors whispered his name before each voyage, half in hope, half in fear. He was power, deep and restless. Hades, the third brother, descended into the earth and claimed the underworld, not out of resentment, but necessity. Someone had to watch over the dead, to ensure that souls did not wander lost. Hades was not cruel, but he was distant. His realm was not of light or laughter, but of silence and memory. He rarely left it, but when he did, the world noticed. Demeter ruled over the harvest, her hands shaping wheat and season alike. The world's fertility lived within her, grief, for she would one day lose what she loved most. Hestia, the quietest of them all, chose the hearth. She gave up her throne to keep peace, tending the eternal flame at the center of Olympus. Where she walked, warmth followed. The others soon joined. Athena, born not from a womb, but from Zeus' own skull, emerged fully armored, goddess of wisdom and war. She was strategic, distant, and brilliant, a warrior whose strength was silence. Apollo, god of light, poetry, and plague, rode the sky with a golden lyre. His twin sister, Artemis, hunting alongside him beneath the moon. He brought prophecy, she brought instinct. They were twins, but not equals each, sharp in their own light. Ares, god of war, lived for blood. He did not fight for justice or strategy, but for the chaos, for the scream of metal and the crack of bones. He was hated even by his own kin, yet war always returned to him. Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire, rose not from Olympus, but from the foam of the sea. Her beauty so divine, the gods quarreled for her favor. She was married to Hephaestus, the lame god of fire and forge, whose hands created beauty, but whose heart often broke in silence. He was the only god who truly worked building weapons, thrones, and traps alike. And then there was Hermes, the messenger, fast, clever, and untouchable. He walked between realms, between words, between truths. He carried souls to the underworld and secrets to the gods. And though he smiled, he never stayed still long enough for anyone to know what he truly felt. These were the 12 gods who ruled not by perfection, but by story, each full of hunger. Olympus was not a place of peace. It was a family of power stitched together by rivalry, jealousy, and fragile loyalty. Zeus was a ruler, but not a faithful husband. He descended to earth often, taking lovers in many forms: a swan, a bull, a shower of gold. From these unions came more demigods, more myths, more pain. Hera, in turn, watched. She could not stop him, but she could strike those he touched. Her wrath fell not on Zeus, but on his lovers and their children Leto, Semele, Heracles. Her revenge was never loud, but it was relentless. Poseidon, too, wandered the world, creating monsters and heroes alike. From his anger came earthquakes. From his touch, beasts. Hades remained apart, but even he found himself pulled into desire. He once rose from the earth to steal Persephone, daughter of Demeter, dragging her into the underworld with no warning, no consent. Demeter's grief turned the earth cold. Crops withered, rivers slowed, and humans began to starve. It was the first time mortals truly felt the weight of Olympus. A deal was struck: Persephone would spend half the year below and half above. Thus, the seasons were born. Even Athena, the wise, was not beyond conflict. She turned Arachne into a spider for daring to match her in weaving. Apollo cursed Cassandra for denying him, granting her prophecy that no one would ever believe. Ares fought without reason. Aphrodite loved without loyalty. Hephaestus crafted golden traps to expose his wife's affair with Ares. Hermes laughed. No god was whole. Olympus stood above the world, but it was not separate from it. The gods interfered, intervened, inspired. They saved and destroyed in the same breath. They loved mortals, envied them, punished them. Their stories were not distant. They were echoes of human pain, human pride, human desire stretched across eternity. And still, the thrones remained. 12 figures carved into myth, not because they were perfect, but because they were unforgettable. This was the new reign, not a golden age, but a divine reflection of everything. That makes us wonder who we are and why we rise and fall the way we do. Olympus was born from war. It ruled with secrets, and it endures through stories. The age of heroes, when gods walk among men. Before mortals had stories, they had silence. The gods lived above, perfect and distant, and the earth below waited. But one being chose to close that distance. Prometheus, a titan who had once stood beside Zeus in war, looked down at humanity not as a failed creation, but as something unfinished. He saw their fear, their cold hands, their helplessness beneath the stars, and he did what gods are warned never to do. He gave them fire. Not just warmth or light, but knowledge. With fire, they learned to forge, to cook, to dream, to rebel. It was a spark that would never go out. Zeus saw this as treason. To him, fire was not a gift, but a weapon placed in unworthy hands. As punishment, he chained Prometheus to a mountain, far from heaven or earth, where each day an eagle came to tear at his liver a wound that never healed, a pain that never ended. And still, Prometheus did not scream. His silence echoed longer than any god's fury. But Zeus was not done. He did not just want punishment. He wanted a lesson. And so he ordered the creation of a woman, crafted from beauty, charm, and deception. Her name was Pandora. She was given to mankind, with a jar sometimes called a box, shut and never to be opened. But curiosity, like fire, is a gift no one returns. Pandora opened the lid, and from it came everything the gods had kept from men's sickness, hunger, jealousy, sorrow, death. All the aches that would follow humans forever spilled out into the world. She slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. Only one thing remained trapped inside: hope. And so, mortals lived not in peace, but in complexity. Their world was now full of choices. Joy came with risk. Love came with loss. And into this new age, the gods still walked, not as rulers, but as forces watching, whispering, sometimes wounding. It was in this fragile space between God and man that heroes were born, not divine, but not ordinary, flawed, but chosen. The first was Perseus, born of a mortal mother and a god. He was destined to face death long before most men learned to survive, armed with a mirrored shield, a sword from Hephaestus, winged sandals, and the guidance of Athena. He hunted Medusa Gorgon with hair of snakes and a gaze that turned flesh to stone. He did not look at her. He looked only at her reflection, and with one clean strike, he severed her head. But he did not gloat. He carried the head, still deadly, as a tool to protect others, not as a trophy. Then came Theseus, Prince of Athens, who chose not power, but sacrifice. When his city was forced to send youths to be devoured by the beasts trapped in a twisting labyrinth, Theseus volunteered to go. He faced darkness not with strength, but with thread. A ball of it, given to him by Ariadne, guided his way back after slaying the beast. He walked into the maze knowing he might never leave. But he returned, changed, not celebrated, but haunted. And finally, there was Heracles, known later as Hercules. His strength was unmatched, but so was his suffering. Born of Zeus and a mortal woman, he was hated by Hera before he could speak. She sent madness to cloud his mind, and in that haze, he killed his own wife and children. His punishment was not death, but redemption. 12 labors, each more impossible than the last. He strangled the Nemean lion with bare hands. He cut off the Hydra's heads and burned the stumps. He cleaned stables that hadn't been touched in decades. He brought back the golden apples of the Hesperides, and even descended into the underworld to capture Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades. He completed them all, but no labor could erase what he had done. He was hailed as a hero, but lived as a man constantly trying to make peace with the god inside him and the guilt he could never outrun. These heroes were not perfect. They were not even always good, but they were bridges between Olympus and earth, between myth and mortality, and they showed that greatness was not born, but earned, that pain could shape purpose. The gods watched them closely. Sometimes they helped, sometimes they hindered, but they always cared because, in these heroes, they saw something they could not be: human. The age of heroes was not a golden time. It was filled with blood, betrayal, quests that left scars rather than songs. But it was real, and from it, myths were no longer just about gods. They became about choice, consequence, courage, about men and women who walked into impossible trials and came out changed, not because they were stronger, but because they endured. Prometheus gave fire, Pandora gave pain, and the heroes gave memory stories passed from voice to voice, carved into stone, painted onto vases, whispered to children who needed to believe that someone, somewhere, had once stood up against monsters, and won, just barely. That was enough. The Trojan War, the fall of a civilization. The war that would burn a city to ash did not begin with swords or strategy. It began with a single golden apple. At a wedding among the gods, Arista, goddess of discord, was not invited. In response, she threw an apple into the gathering, inscribed with a challenge: to the fairest. 3 goddesses claimed it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. They turned to Paris, a young Trojan prince, to decide who deserved the title. Each offered him a gift. Hera promised power, Athena offered wisdom, but Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris chose beauty. Helen was already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, but Paris took her anyway, either by love or by trickery, and fled with her across the sea to Troy. That theft lit the fuse. The Greeks launched 1,000 ships, kings and warriors sailing east to retrieve a queen and restore their pride. What followed was not a battle, but a decade of blood and silence, rage and honor, war that echoed the gods' cruelty, but was fought by mortals. On the Greek side stood Achilles, a warrior said to be nearly invincible, dipped in the river Styx as a child, with only his heel left vulnerable. He fought not for Helen, but for glory, and later for revenge. His rage burned brighter than any flame, especially after his closest companion, Patroclus, was killed wearing his armor. Achilles returned to battle and faced Hector, Troy's greatest defender, in single combat. He killed him and dragged his body round the city walls. But even Achilles would not survive the war. A poisoned arrow, guided by the gods and aimed by Paris, struck his heel. He died not as a god, but as a man feared, mourned, and remembered. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, was there too. Cunning rather than strong, his mind was sharper than any blade. When brute force failed to breach Troy's walls, it was Odysseus who devised the trick that would end the war. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse and left it at Troy's gates, pretending to retreat. The Trojans pulled it into the city as a trophy, not knowing it held Greek soldiers inside. That night, while the city slept, the soldiers crept out, opened the gates, and unleashed destruction. Troy burned. Its people were slaughtered or enslaved. King Priam was killed. Queen Hecuba wept until her voice vanished. And Helen Beautiful, cursed Helen, was taken back to Greece. But the war did not truly end there. Its ghosts followed the survivors. Odysseus began a journey home that would take 10 long years, longer than the war itself. He faced monsters and temptations, storms and shipwrecks. He blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, resisted the songs of the sirens, outwitted the sorceress Circe, and descended into the underworld. Each step forward cost him something: his men, his peace, his innocence. When he finally reached Ithaca, disguised and tired, he found his house overrun with suitors trying to claim his wife, Penelope. He revealed himself, not with a speech, but with a bow drawn and fired straight through the hearts of those who had waited to replace him. He had come home, but he was no longer the man who had left. The Trojan War was more than a fight for a woman. It was a turning point in myth, a moment where gods, heroes, and men all suffered the weight of their choices. The gods had played with mortal lives, guiding arrows and fates like chess pieces, but they could not stop the cost. Even they, in their immortality, watched the fires of Troy with something close to regret. What burned in that city was not just stone and story, it was the age of heroes itself. After Troy, the world grew quieter. The gods grew more distant. The line between myth and man began to blur, and in the silence that followed, only stories remained, echoes of courage, rage, beauty, and betrayal, not because they were perfect, but because they were human. The end of the mythic age, when gods faded. There was no trumpet, no storm, no final clash to mark the end of the mythic age. It did not die in fire or in war, but in silence. Slowly, almost tenderly, the gods began to step back. For centuries they had walked among mortals, whispering in dreams, sparking wars, falling in love, casting punishments from mountaintops. They had shaped the fates of kings, stood behind every thunderstorm and ocean wave, breathed life into stories that blurred the line between the divine and the human. But the world was changing. After Troy fell, and after Odysseus limped back to a home that had forgotten him, something shifted. Mortals began to look less to the sky and more to themselves. They farmed, they built cities, they made laws not by prophecy but by reason. The stars still shone, but they no longer spoke. Olympus, once vibrant with the voices of 12 gods, grew quiet. Zeus still ruled, but the throne felt heavier. Hera's jealousy faded into memory. Poseidon's trident stirred fewer storms. Hades waited in his shadowed kingdom, but fewer souls called his name in fear. And the new generation, those born after the last hero fell, had fewer gods in their lives and more questions. Myths became stories, and stories became history, and history turned to dust. But it was not a loss. It was a passing, like the setting of a sun too bright to look at for too long. The gods had never truly belonged to the earth. They had only borrowed time here. They watched the world shift beneath them, and though some raged and others mourned, they all knew their era had ended. There were still whispers of miracles, a statue that cried, a storm that came too quickly, a voice heard in the wind. But these became rarer, and soon only the poets remembered. Prometheus's fire remained, burning now in forges and ideas, but he himself had vanished. Athena no longer guided the hands of weavers. Dionysus no longer danced in wine-soaked forests. Hermes no longer delivered messages through dreams. They had not died, because gods do not die, but they had stepped aside. There were still temples, still prayers, still sacrifices laid on cold altars, but the gods no longer answered, not out of cruelty, but because they were no longer needed. Humanity had grown. The age of reason, of philosophy, of politics and empires was rising. Men who had once begged the sky for mercy now studied the stars with tools. Women who once danced for Artemis now wrote their own hymns. The sacred had become personal, the divine internal. It was not the end of belief, only the end of that particular kind. The kind with thunderbolts and monsters, with metamorphosis and revenge, with glory bought through blood. The world did not forget the gods, but it stopped expecting them. And in that quiet, something beautiful happened. Stories survived, not because they were true in the way history demands, but because they carried something deeper: memory, a feeling, a mirror. We told them not to remember what the gods did, but to remember what we once hoped they could mean: power, love, wrath, forgiveness, sacrifice. The myths became a way to speak about ourselves without ever saying our own names. We became the heroes, the villains, the wanderers, the punished. We became Icarus when we aimed too high, Orpheus when we looked back too soon, Penelope when we waited too long. And so the gods did not vanish. They transformed, from beings of mountain and sky into echoes inside us. And perhaps that was their final gift, to become small enough to carry. The mythic age ended, not in despair, but in evolution. We grew out of Olympus like children leaving home, still loving what raised us, but needing our own world. And somewhere, high above or deep within, the gods still listen, not to rule, not to command, but to remember with us. In every story we tell, they flicker back into existence only for a moment, and that is enough. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the end of the mythic age, a time when gods faded, and humanity stepped into the light of its own story. The legends we've shared remind us that myths are more than ancient tales. They are reflections of who we are, or hopes, our fears, our triumphs, and our struggles. Whether you see these stories as history, metaphor, or something in between, they continue to shape how we understand the world and ourselves. If you enjoyed diving into the mysteries of Greek mythology with me, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear which myth or hero touched you the most, or if there's a story you want us to explore next. Your thoughts and questions bring these ancient tales back to life and make this community so special. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter of our mythic adventures. There's so much more waiting to be uncovered, from the gods and heroes to the hidden truths behind the legends. Every week, new stories, fresh perspectives, and deep dives will be here just for you. And if you want to support the channel even more, sharing this video with friends or fellow mythology lovers is a huge help. It lets us grow and keep telling these timeless stories that inspire and captivate. Thank you again for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep wondering, keep questioning, and remember sometimes the greatest stories are the ones that live inside us all. See you in the next video.